Today, we're going to talk about 11 fears that every freight broker must overcome. Now, the 11 fears that every freight broker must overcome starts with this, and these are in no discernible order. Number one, the fear of change. What you have to understand is, as humans, we are programmed to resist change. We are frightened of change. Change is scary to most people, right? Our human psyche and our brain is designed to stay in the comfort zone and to stick with what you know and to not change, right? But what I want you to understand is that you have to learn to embrace the fact that you can't avoid change. The only constant in life is change. So whether you want it to or not, things are going to change. The big question is, are you going to initiate that change, or is someone going to initiate that change to you, right? Is it going to be your change or someone else's change? Okay. So the best thing you can possibly do is to embrace it and understand that there is no way to avoid change. You have to embrace it. You have to steer into it, right? So that fear of change, I want you to understand, it's real. It's real. It's part of our psyche, but it doesn't have to be, right? So don't fear change. Embrace it. That's number one, okay? Number two, fear of failure. Now, fear of failure is really fear of embarrassment, possibly losing everything. It's our ego, it's our pride, it's the fact that we don't want the doubters to be right? They will have been right. Here's all I want you to do. This is very simple. Ask yourself one very simple question. And that is this: if you were on your deathbed right now, would you regret not seizing the opportunity to become a freight broker or freight agent? That's the question. If you were on your deathbed right now, would you regret not seizing that opportunity? Now, I can't answer that question for you. Only you can answer that question. But that's the simple question that you need to ask. And I can tell you that you're going to know one way or the other if this is something that's for you, if this is the right decision for you, just by analyzing that simple question. Okay. So number two is fear of failure. Number three, fear that you don't know enough. Okay. Everyone has gaps in their knowledge and blind spots in their knowledge, right? Everybody has those gaps and blind spots. When I first started out, I had lots of gaps and blind spots. And over time, I've developed my skills, right? I've found mentors and coaches. I've taken trainings. But what I want you to understand is, don't let fear cause you to constantly doubt yourself. One of the things that I see a lot from people when they're just getting started is, they don't believe they know enough. And so they're constantly doubting their self. Even when they learn a skill, even when they learn something new, and they're constantly second guessing themselves and doubting themselves. So that's number three, fear that you don't know enough. Okay. Trust me, you don't need to know everything, and you don't need to be perfect at everything in order to succeed. You just have to start. Okay. So number four, fear of the unknown. This is one of the hardest ones. I mean, the fact is, there's no guarantee when starting a freight brokerage or any business for that matter. There's absolutely no guarantees. The unknown is exactly that. It's unknown, and it terrifies people, right? Every time you make a sales call, every time you negotiate a rate, every time you dispatch a driver, every time you deliver a load on time, certainty, your level of certainty goes up, right? So every time you do something right, that level of certainty goes up. Equally though, every time you do something wrong or you make a mistake, right, what happens is you're able to learn faster so that you can avoid that mistake again in the future. So The fear of the unknown, right? I'm either going to do it right or I'm going to do it wrong. Either way, it's a win-win. So don't let that paralyze you. Okay. That's number 4. Number 5, fear of committing to business expenses. All right. So business plans are great and writing things down on paper is great. But some people just choke when it comes to putting their own money on the line. When it comes time, they got to write the check or they got to put in their credit card or whatever the case may be. Some people just choke when it comes to committing to business expenses, whether that be training expenses or whether that be your application fee or whether that be your load boards or whether that be your bond or whatever the case may be. The fact is, it's virtually impossible to start any business, including a freight brokerage, without committing at least a little bit of capital. Now, if you become a freight broker, you have a little bit more capital than if you become a freight agent. Freight agents are even less capital. So for those of you that are, that are really conservative with your finances, start as a freight agent. Our average agent made over $100,000 working from home the last year. We had top agents that made over $100,000 a month, right? As a freight agent. That's not even owning your own brokerage, okay? So you can start very inexpensively. But that fear of committing to business expenses is a real fear that a lot of people have. But it's something you have to come to terms with, all right? Number 5. Number 6, fear of taking risks. Now, I want you to understand something. There's a difference between a unmitigated risk, like let's call it like a gambler who goes to Vegas and blows his life savings on the craps table or the roulette wheel, okay, gambling. That's unmitigated risk versus calculated risk. So calculated risk is when you decide to start a business, for example, and you find a mentor, you get trained, you save up the money required to get started. You invest in skills, you invest in learning, you invest in relationships, you invest in expertise, right? And so those things help to mitigate the risk. So how did I mitigate the risk when I first got started back in 2003? Well, I didn't know anything about logistics. You probably know more right now than I knew when I first got started. I had some entrepreneurial experience, but I had no freight brokerage, freight agency, or trucking experience. So what did I do? I went out and mitigated my risk by hiring a consultant who had been in the industry for 25 or 30 years, who was well known and respected. I hired him. I paid him $10,000 to fly to Buffalo, New York for a week to help fill in the gaps and to build my confidence so that I felt competent, so that I could then take that next step. Okay. So that was how I was able to mitigate my risk. How can you mitigate your risk? You can mitigate your risk by doing free trainings on time, like these on Freight Broker Bootcamp or on my YouTube channel or on Facebook. You can invest in an online course. You can invest in a coaching program. There's all kinds of ways. You can find a mentor. So there's all kinds of ways that you can help to mitigate your risk, right? Invest and learn new skills. Okay. So those are examples of number 6, which is fear of taking risk. Number 7 is fear of disappointing others. Nobody wants to disappoint their friends. Nobody wants to disappoint their family. Nobody wants to disappoint their loved ones. Nobody wants to disappoint their customers. Okay. But here's what you have to understand when it comes to overcoming this fear of disappointing others. You can either shrink your goals and live a very small life, uncontested, where you're never going to disappoint anybody except yourself, or, which is basically just playing it safe, or you can accept that responsibility. You can accept the fact that you may at some point during your business or during your career let somebody down. But the fact is it won't be for a lack of trying. It won't be for a lack of want, right? So I want you to understand the fear of disappointing others is real. We all have it. We all have it at one time or another. But you can't allow it to paralyze you, because if you do, you'll never take that important step, right? All right, number 8, the fear of being pushed into an uncomfortable situation. All right, so Perfect example of an uncomfortable situation. Public speaking, like I'm doing right now in front of hundreds and thousands of people, right? Public speaking is, some people say that public speaking, people are more afraid of public speaking than they are death, right? that's a running stat that you'll hear. Sales, negotiating, right? These are all things that people are, get uncomfortable with. There's an uncomfortable component to all of those things until you do them. But what you got to understand is every time you do a sales call, every time you negotiate a load, every time you dispatch a driver, every time you steer into that uncomfort zone, right? And get uncomfortable, that you expand. It expands your skills. It expands your capabilities. It expands your mindset. And it allows you to go further, faster down the road, right? So the fear of being pushed into into an uncomfortable situation, I get it, right? I was very uncomfortable with sales when I first started. I was very uncomfortable with public speaking when I first started. But here's the reality. The more you do it, it breeds confidence. And confidence, right, helps build competence, right? And vice versa, all right? So that's number 8, fear of being pushed into an uncomfortable situation. Number 9, fear of being wrong. Most entrepreneurs are A-type personalities and we don't like to be wrong. But what I want you to understand is you don't need to be perfect in business. You don't need to always be right in order to be successful. You have to be willing to be wrong and open to learning from your mistakes. So perfection is unattainable. I want you to understand that. So you are going to be wrong. I have been wrong many, many, many times. But yet, throughout my career, I've been able to do over $200 million as an entrepreneur. But I've been wrong probably more than I've been right. But the key is I learn from those mistakes. That's how we expedite the learning process. That's how we evolve. That's how we grow. Okay? So that is number 9, fear of being wrong. Number 10, fear that you're not good enough. Fear that you're not good enough. It's called imposter syndrome, right? So there's that self-doubt. There's that imposter syndrome. There's that fear that you're not competent, right? And like I said just a bit ago, competence builds confidence. So, you are good enough. Trust me, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to know all of the answers before you get started. Here's what I can tell you. There's that old adage, if you wait for all the lights to turn green before you head to work in the morning, you're always going to be late. Okay? So that's number 10, fear that you're not good enough. And number 11, drum roll please, fear of saying no. Fear of saying no. Now let me explain to you what I mean. Most brokers feel like any customer, especially when they're starting up, any customer, any load, any business is good, right? Anybody that's willing to talk to them is good, right? When they first start. What I want you to understand, and what I've stressed in my trainings and my philosophy in general, is you need to niche down and you need to focus on something very specific. And I talk about how to develop your niche and how to stay focused, right? So you need to focus on something specific. You need to grow your knowledge and your skills, and then you can expand from there. So saying no, learning to say no to prospects, to potential opportunities, learning how to say no to your own bad habits, learning how to say no is a very important lesson, right? I think I've done an entire training on this in the past. It's a very important and powerful lesson that every new broker needs to learn. I remember when I first got started, we had a very specific niche. I had salespeople and brokers that were working with me. They would come to me with things that were outside of our niche, and I would always have to tell them no. And it was very challenging at first to tell them no because you don't want to demotivate them. But once they realized the power of niching down and the power of focusing on that niche, they never regretted it. They were never mad at me because they understood. That's why we were able to do our first year in business, 1.2 million in sales. And then our second year in business, $3.6 million in sales, and then 6 million, and then 12 million, and then 18 million. And eventually grew that business and did over $200 million as a freight broker. So those are the 11 fears that every freight broker needs to overcome. Now, I don't want to go back through these, but I do want you to understand that fear is a part of the game. and you're not going to avoid it. That's the reason why I did this training. I want you to be able to tackle these issues head on. I want you to understand that you're not alone. I want you to understand that it's very common, that this is something that everybody goes through. So, all you got to do is push through it, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope this was something that helped you. If it did, and you are looking to become a freight broker or a freight agent, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Trained over 10,000 students, been in business over a decade, and we offer a 60-day, 100% unconditional money-back guarantee. So you don't need to fear that, because you're guaranteed regardless. If you're not happy during the first 60 days, just send us an email. We will gladly give your money back, okay? Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next Monday, like every Monday, for another Freight Broker Bootcamp Live.